Good morning, good morning, good morning. Assalamu alaikum, ciao, konnichiwa. How are you doing today? This is Ken at 10. If you haven't been here before, thank you for joining us for the first time and welcome. If you're coming back, then thank you so much for coming back and joining us. I hope you're well. Good morning to you. Today, we are in SW16, by the way. We're James Alexander Estate Agents. We talk every day, every weekday about property, what's going on with the market, what we got in, what we think's in store, and just generally discussing things really, both locally and nationally in terms of property. And thank you to all of those of you that regularly watch and listen. Please do like and share because it helps the channel. And today, the weather in Norbury is rather grey and dull and overcast. I seem to be repeating that every day, but honestly, I am looking, and it is just about the same every day. It's a strange thing. A few things in the news today, and I want to talk to you about if you're selling a property with tenants in situ, how you do that right now, because it is very tricky, and this seems to be a recurring theme that we're finding, and what you can do about it. If you have a property, you've got tenants in it, and you've decided you wish to sell it right now, what are your choices? I'll come on to that in a moment, but just in terms of a few other things in the news, not much in terms of property news today. I did see that some are suggesting that there might be a situation where the stamp duty extension, which we're all hoping for, might have to show that the transaction is already proceeding. My guess is he won't do that because I think that would be complex and it will just be a straight extension for another 6 weeks, we hope. We'll see. Nobody can be sure on that. Future trends, what can we expect? Well, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is asking for rent controls when he gets re-elected in May this year. What could we expect if that happened? Well, an exodus of landlords is the short answer. We'll see. If he gets elected, then I do think that what will happen is, and these things always have unintended consequences. He wants rent controls for the right reasons so that tenants aren't unreasonably charged. But the problem is that current prices reflect current rent levels. And therefore, if all of a sudden you control that rent level, then there'll be many people that can no longer afford to rent their property with any comfortable sort of margin. And rather than risk using their own money to chase a future investment gain, they'll pull out the market. And the danger with that is that we then end up in a situation like we were a few years ago, where the undersupply of property is acute and rents are rising dramatically. So we'll see. Future trends, what can we expect? I was thinking to myself about what we might see in the future for property and what does it mean? You know, when you look at the likes of Debenhams and all of the vacant high street shops, what will happen to those in the future? Well, one of two things. They're either going to be turned into residential, or I think more likely what we'll see, because the local authorities will want to promote employment. So I think what we'll start to see is mixed use, more shops with residential above and more entrances from the high road into residential flats above, smaller units. So I envisage that they'll carve out a lot of these larger units into many smaller units where possible, and that will be part of the planning application. So the developers will want it all flats, of course, and the local authorities will be like, well, hang on, where's the employment here? Can we get some shops in? How can we squeeze in different use classes? So it'd be interesting to see what that means. And of course, the rise of the driverless car will be another thing of the future, which I'm really interested to see. When you look at people like Tesla now, and they're nearly at a stage where the cars are driving themselves, it's not going to be that long before we see cars on our streets which are driverless. And when that happens, what would be the point in having your own car if you could summon one? It's an intriguing thought, isn't it? You know, imagine summoning an Uber which comes and drives you to work, or is, you know, just happens to be driving outside your office when you need one. And what will that mean then for car parks? What will happen to car parks, for instance? Car parks would be redundant. There wouldn't be any requirement for them. They'd be out of town areas where these fleets of driverless cars would recharge and then end up autonomously driving around the streets in the most popular areas, waiting for the next fare. That's quite a sea change, isn't it? And of course, the traffic would be completely different in those circumstances as well. And you could then envisage houses where you wouldn't have off-street parking anymore. What would be the point of off-street parking if you don't have cars? So the frontages of houses could actually become greener and quieter. And you could find that they're entirely residential, you know. So there's a drop-off point, especially in the larger blocks now. You know, there's already blocks where there's car sharing arrangements beneath the block and not much in the way of parking, particularly here and around Croydon, where parking is at such a premium, it's unbelievable. So really interested to see what that might happen. And the rise of AI as well, artificial intelligence, will make massive changes as well. One of the things that's already going to be a change is open banking. And the way this is impacting things is that you, as a letting agent, at some point in the future, and certainly referencing companies already, are looking at you sharing your banking data, not in the form of statements, but in the form of sharing the transactions via open banking, so that they can be verified in terms of, for instance, your rent payments. So imagine, as a landlord, if you could say to your tenant, show me your rent payments for the last 5 years, and that was available to you from their bank directly, as long as they gave permission to share just that data with you, and you could see those transactions going through their bank instantly. What confidence would that give, and how much quicker could you speed up the reference process, having confidence that those rent credits have been there for many years before for previous landlords? That will be a fantastic innovation. It's already there, but I think in the next few years we'll see that really come to the fore, and the whole referencing process will be much more streamlined. One of the big problems at the moment is that we find that often people apply and we find that they have bad debts, bad credit later. And there's nothing more frustrating than thinking all things are equal and then finding that there's bad credit, especially when you ask the question. Often people say, no, we don't have bad credit. And then it comes up, and then they're not insurable. We carry out insurance deals with landlords where we insure the properties against tenants' non-payment. And these policies require that tenants have good, strong credit scores so that they're unlikely to default anyway. And of course, when they haven't got good credit scores, they won't be insurable, and therefore landlords don't want them. So to speed up that whole process, it's becoming quicker and more streamlined, but I see the open banking side of things really helping landlords with that in the future. In terms of lettings, I think that there will be a tightening supply as the rise of UK prices in general makes a whole nation of people unable to get onto the ladder, especially at the bottom end, whilst landlords are making quite good profits. I think that we've already seen a real squeeze on that from the government, and with the introduction of capital gains tax changes that we expect in the budget, you could find that's another reason. That, together with Sadiq Khan's statements, together with landlord licensing, we could see an exodus of landlords going out of the market. But not all is lost, landlords, and I'll tell you why. Because when there's an exodus of landlords out of the market, sometimes the smart money is going the opposite way to the sheep, isn't it? And what it will mean is, of course, that the supply of property for rental is even more limited than it is already. At the moment, what we're finding here in London and the suburbs is that rents have fallen off a bit, not massively, but they have definitely fallen off. And of course, if you think about it, that's quite natural in the middle of a pandemic. I understand that they're raising out of London, and that's quite logical too, isn't it? As people telecommute, go to other areas, and perhaps areas that they didn't think that they could live in previously, that are now more rural, more remote, perhaps more beautiful, although London's beautiful too. And London will bounce back. We're coming out of this pandemic soon, very soon, we hope. So selling with sitting tenants in. This is something that I wanted to talk to you about today. If you've got a tenant in your property and you wish to sell it, you have a number of issues confronting you. The first and foremost is that you need to give that tenant notice if you wish to remove them. And that notice, under current pandemic rules, has to be 6 months. That's right, 6 months under Section 21, or under any other grounds, actually, it's 6 months. So 6 months is a long time if you're wishing to sell your property. And what you do when you invoke that is you find that it's very difficult then to sell to a first-time buyer. First-time buyers don't want to wait 6 months. And of course, the added problem is that that's the period of the notice up until the point it expires. If the tenants choose not to move at the end of that period, you've got another problem. So the risk, especially for first-time buyers, is quite high that they make an offer on your property. Even when that notice expires, there's no guarantee that the tenants will leave. And if they don't, and they're advised to stay, often by local authorities wanting to protect what accommodation is available for those tenants, it causes a real problem. So what can you do about it? Number of things. You could sell to another landlord. The issue with that for most sellers is that the price that a landlord wants to pay is lower than the price that a first-time buyer will pay. And this is the conflict. So then you've got to ask yourself, what is the difference? You need to take advice from a local agent to find out what that difference is. Locally, it's around 10 to 15%. So what we find is that if you've got a property that's, for instance, worth 400,000, then if you reduce the price of it to 360 for an investor landlord, then they'll take it over with tenants in situ quite often. But of course, that relies also on the level of rent you're charging. And one of the big problems that we find is that most landlords, and this may come as a surprise to you out there, are quite kind. And once they've let their property and received their rent initially, They don't put it up every year. They tend to just leave it where it is. And this has led to a situation where many tenants are paying rents that are more reflective of the market 5, 6, 10 years ago even. And so when they come to sell, even with tenants in situ, the yield just isn't there. And to correct it now by the vast difference is too great a margin. And so they find themselves in a really conflicted situation there. So what can you do? If you've got tenants in situ, you want to sell for the best price, you might want to speak to your tenants. Quite often, if you speak to your tenants and offer them an incentive to leave, a financial one particularly, then they will listen to you. You know, recently we've sold a 3-bedroom house where the tenants didn't want to move. We arranged a deal between landlord and tenant, which both were happy with. The landlord got more than he would have got by selling to investors, and the tenants got a little bonus payment, which helped them to move on, and with the rent rise that they were invariably facing. So there are always around the problem. If you've got creative agents and agents that understand the market, understand tenancies, understand tenancy law, as well as looking at the sales side, quite often what you'll find is that agents don't want to know about one bit, they only want to know about the other. And frankly, in this market, if you want to sell, you need agents with an overall picture of both sales and lettings and understanding the mechanics of what it means to evict a tenant and the potential future implications of doing that. So, you know, if you're in that situation, you want a bit of advice, as always, call us. And I hope you've enjoyed the video today. And if you have, please share, like our page. We'd be very grateful, as always. Hope you have a fantastic day today. We'll be back tomorrow with another Ken at 10. Until then, stay safe and look after your families.